Good morning. Good morning. Now that you have your freedom, you may not be interested in listening to these stories anymore because you could be out running around, playing, or doing whatever you want. But I thought I would finish this one we started, and then you can decide if you want me to keep reading. This one is Charles Augustus Milverton, written by Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, The Great Adventures of Sherlock Holmes. Charles Augustus Milverton. It is years since the incidents of which I speak took place, and yet it is with diffidence that I allude to them. For a long time, even with the utmost discretion and reticence, it would have been impossible to make the facts public, but now the principal person concerned is beyond the reach of human law, and with due suppression, the story may be told, in such a fashion as to injure no one. It records an absolutely unique experience in the career of both Mr. Sherlock Holmes and of myself. The reader will excuse me if I conceal the date or any other fact by which he might trace the actual occurrence. We had been out for one of our evening rambles, Holmes and I, and had returned about 6 o'clock on a cold, frosty winter's evening. As Holmes turned up the lamp, the light fell upon a card on the table. He glanced at it and then, with an ejaculation of disgust, threw it on the floor. I picked it up and it read, Charles Augustus Milverton, Appledore Towers, Hampstead, Agent. Who is he? I asked. The worst man in London, Holmes answered, and as he sat down and stretched his legs before the fire, is anything on the back of the card? I turned it over. Will call at 6:30 c.a.m., I read. He's about due. Do you feel a creeping, shrinking sensation, Watson, when you stand before the serpents in the zoo and see the slithery, gliding, venomous creatures with their deadly eyes and wicked, flattened faces? Well, that's how Milverton impresses me. I've had to do with 50 murders in my career, but the worst of them never gave me the repulsion for which I have for this fellow, and yet I can't get out of doing business with him. Indeed, here he is at my invitation. But who is he? I'll tell you, Watson. He is the king of all blackmailers. Heaven help the man, and still more the woman, whose secret and reputation come in the power of Milverton. With a smiling face and a heart of marble, he will squeeze and squeeze until he has drained them dry. This fellow is a genius in his way, and would have made his mark in some more savory trade. His method is as follows. He allows it to be known that he is prepared to pay very high sums for letters which compromise people of wealth or position. He received these wares not only from treacherous valets or maids, but frequently from genteel ruffians who have gained the confidence and affection of trusting women. He deals with no niggard hand. I happen to know that he paid £700 to a footman for a note 2 lines in length, and that the ruin of a noble family was the result. Everything which is in the market goes to Milverton, and there are hundreds in this great city who turn white at his name. No one knows where his grip may fall, for he is far too rich and far too cunning to work from hand to mouth. He will hold a card back for years in order to play it at the moment when the stake is best worth winning. I have said that he is the worst man in London, and I would ask you, how could one compare the ruffian who in hot blood bludgeons his mate with his man, who methodically and at his leisure tortures the soul and wrings the nerves in order to add to his already swollen money bags? I had seldom heard my friend speak with such intensity of feeling. But surely, said I, the fellow must be within the grasp of the law. Technically, no doubt, but practically not. What would it profit a woman, for example, to get him a few months' imprisonment if her ruin must immediately follow? His victims dare not hit back. If ever he blackmailed an innocent person, then indeed we should have him, but he is as cunning as the evil one. No, we must find other ways to fight him. And why is he here? Because an illustrious client has placed her piteous case in my hands. It is the Lady Eva Brackwell, the most beautiful debutante of last season. She is to be married in a fortnight to the Earl of Dovercourt. This fiend has several imprudent letters. Imprudent! Watson, nothing worse, which were written to an impecunious young squire in the country. They would suffice to break off the match. Milverton will send the letters to the Earl unless a large sum of money is paid him. I have been commissioned to meet him and to make the best terms I can. At that instant there was a clatter and a rattle in the street below. Looking down, I saw a stately carriage and pair, the brilliant lamps gleaming on the glossy haunches of the noble chestnuts. A footman opened the door, and a small, stout man in a shaggy astrakhan overcoat descended. A minute later, he was in the room. Charles Augustus Milverton was a man of 50, with a large, intellectual head, a round, plump, hairless face, a perpetual frozen smile, and two keen gray eyes which gleamed brightly from behind broad, golden-rimmed glasses. There was something of Mr. Pickwick's benevolence, and his appearance marred only by the insincerity of the fixed smile and by the hard glitter of those restless and penetrating eyes. His voice was as smooth and suave as his countenance. As he advanced with a plump little hand extended, murmuring his regret for having missed us on the first visit. Holmes disregarded the outstretched hand and looked at him with a face of granite. Milverton's smile broadened. He shrugged his shoulders, removed his overcoat, folded it with great deliberation over the back of a chair, and then took a seat. "This gentleman," said he, with a wave in my direction, "is it discreet? Is it right? Dear Watson is my friend and partner." "Very good, Mr. Holmes. It is only in your client's interest that I protested. The matter is so very delicate." Dr. Watson had already heard of it. "Then we can proceed to business. You say that you are acting for Lady Eva. Has she empowered you to accept my terms?" "What are your terms?" £7,000. "And the alternative?" "My dear sir, it is painful for me to discuss it, but if the money is not paid on the 14th, there certainly will be no marriage on the 18th. His insufferable smile was more complacent than ever. Holmes thought for a while. "You appear to me," he said at last, "to be taking matters too much for granted. I am, of course, familiar with the contents of these letters. My client will certainly do what I may advise. I shall counsel her to tell her future husband the whole story and to trust his generosity." Milverton chuckled. "You evidently do not know the Earl," he said. From the baffled look upon Holmes' face, I could clearly see that he did. "What harm is there in the letters?" he asked. "They are sprightly." "Very sprightly," Milton answered. "The lady was a charming correspondent, but I can assure you that the Earl of Dovercourt would fail to appreciate them. However, since you think otherwise, we will let it rest at that. It is purely a matter of business. If you think that it is in the best interests of your client that these letters should be placed in the hands of the Earl, then you would indeed be foolish to pay so large a sum of money to regain them." He rose and seized his astrakhan coat. Holmes was gray with anger and mortification. "Wait a little," he said. "You go too fast. We would certainly make every effort to avoid scandal in so delicate a matter." Milverton relapsed into his chair. "I was sure that you would see the light," he purred. "At the same time," Holmes continued, "Lady Eva is not a wealthy woman. I assure you that £2,000 would be a drain upon her resources, and that name is utterly beyond her power. I beg, therefore, that you will moderate your demands, and that you will return the letters at the price I indicate, which is, I assure you, the highest you can get." Milverton's smile broadened, and his eyes twinkled luminously, humorously. "I am aware that what you say is true about the lady's resources," he said. "At the same time, you must admit the occasion of a lady's marriage is a very suitable time for her friends and relatives to make some little effort upon her behalf. They may hesitate as to an acceptable wedding present. Let me assure them that this little bundle of letters would give more joy than all the candelabra and butter dishes in London. It is impossible, said Holmes. Dear me, how unfortunate, cried Milverton, taking out a bulky pocketbook. I cannot help thinking that ladies are ill-advised in not making an effort. Look at this. He held up a little note with a coat of arms upon the envelope. That belongs to, well, perhaps it is hardly fair to tell the name now until tomorrow morning, but at that time it will be in the hands of the lady's husband, and all because she will not find a beggarly sum which she could get in an hour by turning her diamonds into paste. It is such a pity. Now, you remember the sudden end of the engagement between the Honorable Miss Miles and Colonel Dorking? Only 2 days before the wedding, there was a paragraph in the Morning Post to say that it was all off. And why? It is almost incredible, but the absurd sum of £1,200 would have settled the whole question. Is it not pitiful? And there I find you, a man of sense, boggling about terms when your client's future and honor is in question. You surprise me, Mr. Holmes. What I say is true, Mr. Holmes answered. The money cannot be found. Surely it is better for you to take the substantial sum which I offer than to ruin this woman's career, which you can profit in no way. There you make a mistake, Mr. Holmes. An exposure would profit me indirectly to a considerable extent. I have 8 or 10 similar cases maturing. If it was circulated among them that I had made a severe example of Lady Eva, I should find all of them much more open to reason. You see my point? Holmes sprang from his chair. Get behind him, Watson. Don't let him out. Now, sir, let us see the contents of that notebook. Milverton had glided as quick as a rat to the side of the room and stood with his back against the wall. Mr. Holmes, he said, turning to the front of his coat and exhibiting the butt of a large revolver, which projected from the inside pocket, I have been expecting you to do something original. This has been done so often, and what good ever comes of it? I assure you that I am armed to the teeth, and I am perfectly prepared to use my weapon, knowing that the law will support me. Besides, your supposition that I would bring the letters here in a notebook is entirely mistaken. I would do nothing so foolish. And now, gentlemen, I have 1 or 2 little interviews this evening, and it is a long drive to Hampstead. He stepped forward, took up his coat, laid his hand on his revolver, and turned to the door. I picked up a chair, but Holmes shook his head, and I laid it down again. With a bow, a smile, and a twinkle, Milverton was out of the room, and a few moments after we heard him slam the carriage door, the rattles of the wheels as he drove away. Holmes sat motionless by the fire, his hands buried deep in his trouser pockets, his chin sunk upon his breast, his eyes fixed upon the glowing embers. For half an hour he was silent and still. Then, with the gesture of a man who has taken his decision, he sprang to his feet and passed into his bedroom. A little later, a rakish young workman with a goatee beard and a swagger lit his clay pipe at the lamp before descending into the street. I'll be back in some time, Watson, he said, and vanished into the night. I understood that he had opened his campaign against Charles Augustus Milverton, but I little dreamed the strange shape which that campaign was destined to take. For some days Holmes came and went at all hours in his attire, but beyond a remark that this time was spent at Hampstead, and that was not wasted. I knew nothing of what he was doing. At last, however, on a wild, tempestuous evening, when the wind screamed and rattled against the windows, he returned from his last expedition, and having removed his disguise, he sat before the fire and laughed heartily in his silent, inward fashion. You would not call me a marrying man, Watson? No, indeed. You will be interested to hear that I am engaged. My dear fellow, I congratulate to Milverton's housemaid. Good heavens, Holmes! I wanted information, Watson. Surely you have gone too far. It was a most necessary step. I am a plumber with a rising business, Escott by name. I have walked out with her each evening, and I have talked with her. Good heavens, those talks! However, I have got all I wanted. I know Milverton's house as I know the palm of my hand. But the girl homes, he shrugged his shoulders. You can't help it, my dear Watson. You must play your cards as best you can when such a stake is on the table. However, I rejoice to say that I have a hated rival who will certainly cut me out the instant my back is turned. What a splendid night it is. You like this weather? It suits my purpose, Watson. I mean to burgle Milverton's house tonight. I had a catching of the breath, and my skin went cold at the words, which were slowly uttered in the tone of concentrated resolution. As a flash of lightning in the night shows up in an instant every detail of a wide landscape, so at one glance I seemed to see every possible result of such an action. The detection, the capture, the honored career ending in an irreparable failure and disgrace, my friend himself lying at the mercy of the odious Milverton. For heaven's sakes, Holmes, what are you doing? I cried. My dear fellow, I have given it every consideration. I am never precipitate in my actions, nor would I adopt so energetic and indeed so dangerous a course if any other were possible. Let us look at the matter clearly and fairly. I suppose that you will admit that the action is morally justifiable, though technically criminal. To burgle his house is no more than to forcibly take his pocketbook, an action in which you were prepared to aid me. I turned it over in my mind. Yes, I said, it is morally justifiable so long as our object is to take no articles save those which are used for an illegal purpose. Exactly. Since it is morally justifiable, I have only to consider the question of personal risk. We got to think about that morally justifiable, Bryce. It's not always the case. And nor is it the case to ever do wrong in order to get right. Just remember that. Surely a gentleman should not lay much stress upon this when a lady is in the most desperate need of his help. You will be in such a false position. Well, that is part of the risk. There is no other possible way of regaining these letters. The unfortunate lady has not the money, and there are none of her people in whom she could confide. Tomorrow is the last day of grace, and unless we can get the letters tonight, this villain will be as good as his word and will bring about her ruin. I must therefore abandon my client to her fate, or I must play this last card. Between ourselves, Watson, it's a sporting duel between this fellow Milverton and me. He had, as you saw, the best of the first exchanges, but my self-respect and my reputation are concerned to fight it to a finish. Well, I don't like it, but I suppose it must be, said I. When do we start? You are not coming. Then you are not going, said I. I give you my word of honor, and I never broke it in my life, that I will take a cab straight to the police station and give you away unless you let me share this adventure with you. You can't help me. How do you know that? You can't tell what may happen. Anyway, my resolution is taken. Other people besides you have self-respect and even reputations. Holmes had looked annoyed, but his brow cleared, and he clapped me on the shoulder. Well, well, my dear fellow, be it so. We have shared the same room for some years, and it would be amusing if we ended it by sharing the same cell. You know, Watson, I don't mind confessing to you that I have always had an idea that I would have made a highly efficient criminal. This is the chance of my lifetime in that direction. See here. He took a little neat leather case out of a drawer, and opening it, he exhibited a number of shining instruments. This is a first-class, up-to-date burgling kit, with nickel-plated jimmy, diamond-tipped glass cutter, adaptable keys, and every modern improvement which the march of civilization demands. Here, too, is my dark lantern. Everything is in order. Have you a pair of silent shoes? I have a rubber-sole tennis shoes. Excellent. And a mask? I can make a couple out of black silk. I can see that you have a strong natural turn for this sort of thing. Very good. So you make the masks. We shall have some cold supper before we start. It is now 9:30. At 11, we shall drive as far as Church Row. It is a quarter of an hour's walk from here to Appledore Towers. We shall be at work before midnight. Milverton is a very heavy sleeper. and retires punctually at 10:30. With any luck, we should be back here by 2 with the Lady Eva's letters in my pocket. Holmes and I put on our dress clothes so that we might appear to be 2 theater goers homeward bound. In Oxford Street, we picked up a hansom and drove to an address in Hampstead. Here we paid off our cab, and with our great coats buttoned up, for it was bitterly cold and the wind seemed to blow through us, we walked along the edge of the heath. "It is a business that needs a delicate treatment," said Holmes. "These documents are contained in a safe in the fellow's study, and the study is in the anteroom of his bedchamber. On the other hand, like all these stout little men who do themselves well, he is a plethoric sleeper. Agatha, that's my fiancée, says it is a joke in the servants' hall that it is impossible to wake the master. He has a secretary who is devoted to his interests and never budges from the study all day. That's why we are going in at night. Then he has a beast of a dog which roams the garden. I met Agatha late the last 2 evenings, and she locks the brute up so as to give me a clear run. This is the house, this big one in its own grounds, through the gate, now to the right among the laurels. We might put on our masks here, I think. You see, there is not a glimmer of light in any of the windows, and everything is working splendidly. With our black silk face coverings, which turned us to the 2 most translucent figures in London, we stole up to the silent, gloomy house. A sort of tiled veranda extended along one side of it, lined by several windows and 2 doors. "That's his bedroom," Holmes whispered. "This door opens straight into the study. It would suit us best, but it is bolted as well as locked, and we should make too much noise getting in. Come round here. There's a greenhouse which opens into the drawing room." The place was locked, but Holmes removed a circle of glass and turned the key from the inside. An instant afterwards, he had closed the door behind us, and we had become felons in the eye of the law. The thick, warm air of the conservatory and the rich, choking fragrance of exotic plants took us by throat. He seized my hand in the darkness and led me swiftly past banks of shrubs which brushed against our faces. Holmes had remarkable powers, carefully cultivated, of seeing in the dark. Still holding my hand in one of his, he opened a door, and I was vaguely conscious that we had entered a large room in which a cigar had been smoked not long before. He felt his way among the furniture, opened another door, and closed it behind us. Putting out my left hand, I felt several coats hanging from the wall, and I understood that I was in a passage. We passed along it, and Holmes very gently opened a door upon the right-hand side. Something rushed out at us, and my heart sprang into my mouth, but I could have laughed when I realized that it was the cat. A fire was burning in this new room, and again the air was heavy with tobacco smoke. Holmes entered on the tiptoe, waited for me to follow, and then very gently closed the door. We were in Milverton's study, and a portiere at the farther side showed the entrance to his bedroom. It was a good fire, and the room was illuminated by it. Near the door, I saw the gleam of an electric switch, but it was unnecessary, even if it had been safe to turn it on. At one side of the fireplace was a heavy curtain which covered the bay window we had seen from outside. On the other side was the door which communicated with the veranda. A desk stood in the center with a turning chair of shining red leather. Opposite was a large bookcase with a marble bust of Athene on top. In the corner between the bookcase and the wall there stood a tall green safe, the firelight flashing back from the polished brass knobs upon its face. Holmes stole across and looked at it. Then he crept to the door of the bedroom and stood, slanting head, listening intently. No sound came from within. Meanwhile, it had struck me that it would be wise to secure our retreat through the outer door, so I examined it. To my amazement, it was neither locked nor bolted. I touched Holmes on the arm, and he turned his masked face in that direction. I saw him start, and he was evidently as surprised as I. "I don't like it," he whispered, putting his lips to my very ear. "I can't quite make it out. Anyway, we have no time to lose." "Can I do anything?" "Yes. Stand by the door. If you hear anyone come, bolt it on the inside, and we can get away as we came. If they come the other way, we can get through the door, if our job is done, or hide behind these window curtains if it is not. Do you understand?" I nodded and stood by the door. My first feeling of fear had passed away, and I thrilled now with a keener zest than I had ever enjoyed when we were the defenders of the law instead of the defiers. The high object of our mission was consciousness that it was unselfish and chivalrous. The villainous character of our opponent all added to the sporting interest of the adventure. Far from feeling guilty, I rejoiced and exulted in our dangers. With a glow of admiration, I watched Holmes unrolling his instruments and choosing his tool with the calm, scientific accuracy of a surgeon who performs a delicate operation. I knew the opening of safes was a particular hobby with him, and I understood the joy which it gave him to be confronted with this green gold monster. The dragon which held up its maw, the reputations of fair ladies. Turning up the cuffs of his dress coat, he had placed his overcoat on a chair. Holmes laid out 2 drills, a jemmy, and several skeleton keys. I stood at the center door with my eyes glancing at each of the others, ready for any emergency, though, indeed, my plans were somewhat vague as to what I should do if I were interrupted. For half an hour, Holmes worked with concentrated energy, laying down one tool, picking up another, handling each with the strength and delicacy of the trained mechanic. Finally, I heard a click. The broad green door swung open, and inside I had a glimpse of a number of paper packets, each tied, sealed, and inscribed. Holmes picked one out, but it was hard to read by the flickering fire, and he drew out his little dark lantern, for it was too dangerous with Milverton in the next room to switch on the electric light. Suddenly, I saw him halt, listen intently, and then, in an instant, he had swung the door of the safe to, picked up his coat, stuffed his tools into the pocket, and darted behind the window curtain, motioning me to do the same. Well, that is the end of part 1. This is a very long story, and so we have many more pages left, and I will continue at another time. Hope you enjoy.